Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is NURUL AMALIA FASIHU with track number A1M2 Today I'm going to explain the first material. It's about the nature and function of language. The nature and function of language is the first of part of Supportus Reader, contains two papers, G. Loads Linguistic Symbols Make Man and F.W. Householders on Linguistic Terms based on linguistic primes. Both authors deal with what language is terms of what the linguist is principally interested in. The householder paper most useful inclusion acquaints the novice with various life issues in descriptive linguistics and linguistic theory. It is explicit about differences in approach, yet it treats this variation within one framework. In this respect, it compares favorably with a parallel paper written a decade ago by WAHYUNINGSIH. Next, what emerges immediately from these papers is that descriptive linguistic analysis has traditionally approached a language, usually a small sample of it, as a closed system, one in which it is always possible to segment the physically continue which constitute speech samples into the primes and mapping units discussed by householder, as will become apparent in part 3 and 4, the perception of primes by speakers of the language and the mechanics of the ear combination pose key problems for psycholinguistics. Okay, the nature of language. The first is language is arbitrary. Language is undoubtedly arbitrary as there is no inherent connection between the nature of things or concepts the language deals with, however, by which those things and concepts are expressed. There is no reason why a single term pronounced differently by different communities. The second is language is a social phenomenon. In a sense, language should be considered as a social phenomenon. Language is social that exists in our human society. It is as a means of nourishing and developing culture and establishing human relationships. As a member of particular social group, we human beings interact with each other, which allows to identify with one another, to connect with one another, and to coordinate with one another. This is how language is the part and parcel of our society. Next, the third is language is a symbolic system. Language signifies as a symbolic system. It consists of different types of sound symbols for concepts, things, ideas, objects, and etc. Language has sounds and words as their symbols. Next, the fourth is language is systematic. In spite of the fact that language is symbolic, symbolic are arranged in specific systems. All languages have their arrangement of plans. Each language is an arrangement of system. Furthermore, all language has phonological and synthetic system, and within a system there are also several subsystems. Next, the fifth is language is vocal, verbal, and sound. Language is a system of vocal and verbal of symbolism. It is essentially comprised of vocal sounds just created by a psychological articulatory component in the human body. First, the foremost, it shows up as a vocal sounds only language text, verbal elements such as sound, word, and phrases, which are fixed up in certain ways to make several sentences. Next, the sixth is language is non-instinctive conventional. No language was made in multi-day out of a commonly settled upon the recipe by a gathering of people. Language is the result of advancement and tradition. Every age transmits in the tradition onto the following. Next, seventh is language is productive and creative. Language has its own efficiency and innovativeness. The auxiliary components of human language don't create new expressions which neither the speaker nor her listeners may ever have made or heard previously. Next, language is a system of communication. Language is strong, convenient, and the best form of communication for no doubt. It is the best way to express everything. It is through language that we human beings express our thoughts, desires, emotions, and feelings. Further, we can interact with each other easily through the welfare of language. After all, we may say that language is the best system of communication around the world. Next, language is human and structurally complex. Human language is open-minded, extendable, and modifiable in contrary to animal language. Language should be modified daily through time to time. No species other than human beings have been endowed with the language. Next, the last is language is unique, complex, and modifiable. It's that true that language is a unique phenomenon in the world. Every language has its own characteristics and distinctive features. Furthermore, each language has its own creativity and productivity to deliver the best ways in order to communicate with each other. And this is how language has its own potentiality to be unique, complex, and modifiable by the change of time and culture. Again, it is the function of language. The first is expressive and communicative. Function is the most basic function of language, as we can guess, is that of the expressive function, an attempt to express a sudden change of state, fear, delight, pain, or confusion. But whatever it is, such an expression is not a deliberate, conscious expression, but a spontaneous, immediate response not directed towards any other object. The second is interpretative. It may be seen that when a particular occurrence or expression serves as a stimulus to other, it also serves a function of becoming aware of interpreting a particular situation. Thus, the cry of one animal in the face of danger is interpreted by other members of the species. Interpretative function is very obvious at the human level. Next is the control. When one talks of the function of control, three emerges social dimensions apart from the individual dimension. Gradually, as associations get established between certain states of existence and a stimulus on the one hand and certain sounds, the result the reproducibility of erection. The child cries when he is hungry or suffering from pain. This is okay. Next, The fourth function is remembering and thinking. Imagine our being able to think and remember without the use of words. It is almost impossible to recall or remember or think without the use of words, and therefore language. It is language which help us to encode experience, store them, and retrieve and decode. It is language which help us to translate experience to into talk and engage in the process of different types. Next is function is the discovery of one's name. One of the important milestone in the development of the child is the discovery that he or she has a name, and this is the beginning of the sense of self-identity, which leads to feelings like me, mine, and other, not me, and etc. This is discovery of one's name plays a very crucial role in the overall psychological development of individual. Next, function is social functions of language. In addition to this individual function, language performs a very important social function while promoting a sense of personal identity. Language also serves to develop a sense of social identity, a sense of belongingness to a particular group, marking out different degree of social proximity and distance. And the last is creative function. Language plays a very crucial role in imaginative and creative activity. Is it possible to think of writing a novel, writing a poetry without language? It's not. Language then not only helps us to control and regulate our cognitions, but also enables us to break a free and engage in a creative imaginations. Here again, paradoxically, language also contributes to emergence of very creative, delicious, and belief system in the mentally ill. Okay, that's all my explanation about the first material. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I close by saying wabillahi taufiq walhidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name's REZKITA NURWAHYUNINGSIH. My registration number A1M219-120. I will explain the material about approaches to the study of language. What is approaches to the study of language? An approach is a set of interrelated assumptions. The language learning approach is a set of interrelated assumptions related to the nature of language and language learning, explained by Zajdi and Budiasi. The use of this approach in language teaching determines: the first is a person perspective in responding to language as subject matter. The second is learning content. The third is learning techniques and processes, and the last is planning and implementation of teaching programs. The three types of approaches to the study of language. The first, whole language approach. The second, integrated approach. And the third is communicative approach. The first type is whole language approach. Whole language is a view of the nature of learning and how to encourage this process so that students can learn effectively and efficiently so as to achieve optimal result. By Weaver. As an approach to language teaching according to Goodman, whole language use a set of assumptions from four basic foundations, namely, first, learning theory, second, language theory, third, assumptions about teaching and the role of teachers, and fourth, view of the language teaching curriculum. The second type is integrated approach. An integrated approach is a language teaching place designed by presenting lesson materials in an integrated manner, namely by unifying, linking, or associating learning materials so that they do not stand alone or separate. The direction and purpose of an integrated approach, according to Bress and Ross, leads to the formation of student thinking as a whole, because naturally elementary age students always see things with a holistic view. Based on the description above, an integrated approach can be seen as, first, learning that departs from a certain theme as the center of attention used to understand other symptoms and concepts, but from the relevant field of study and from other fields of study. Second, a learning approach that connects various fields of study around and within the range of abilities and development of children. The third, a way to simultaneously develop children's knowledge and skills. And the last, assemble or combine a number of concepts in several different fields of study in the hope that the child will learn better and more meaningfully. The third is communicative approach. In the sense for the 2004 curriculum KBK, it is stated that the function of language is a tool for communication. Communication is a process of conveying intention to others by using certain channels. The scenes above imply that the 2004 curriculum adopts a communicative approach. The communicative approach is an approach that is based on the idea that the ability to use language in communication is a goal that must be achieved in language learning. The purpose of language teaching according to the communicative approach is, first, developing student communicative competence, namely the ability to use the language they are learning to communicate in various situations and contexts. And the second is improve mastery of the four language skills needed in communication. That is my material about approaches to the study of language, and thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is REZKITA AMALIA. My rec number A1M219110. Here I will explain psycholinguistic material about a survey synchronic psycholinguistic research, especially speech perception. Speech perception is the process by which the sounds of language are heard, interpreted, and understood. The study of speech perception is closely linked to the field of phonology and phonetics in linguistics, and cognitive psychology and perception in psychology. Research in speech perception seeks to understand how human listeners recognize speech sounds and use this information to understand spoken language. The process of perceiving speech begins at the level of sound signal and the process of audition. After processing the initial auditory signal, speech sounds are further processed to extract acoustic cues and phonetic information. This speech information can then be used for higher level language process, such as word recognition. Categories of speech perception theories is 1. Active and passive, 2. Bottom-up and top-down, 3. Autonomous and interactive. And the last speech perception theories is motor theory, acoustic invariance theory, logogen theory, cohort theory, direct realism, trace model, fuzzy logic model of perception, and native language magnet theory. Okay, that's my explanation. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am SADMADINATUL MUKHLISA. My register number is A1M219112. I will explain about the sequential organization of linguistic events. The meaning of sequential. Sequential action, or often called a sequence, is a series of instructions or actions that will be carried out or executed by the computer based on the order in which it is written. So, if you write down a sequential action consisting of a sequence of instructions or actions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and n. Each instruction or action will be executed sequentially, starting from first, then second, and so on. The simplest program, of course, contains only one instruction. The order of instruction in the algorithm is very important. There are partial actions which, if you change the order of the instructions or the action, will affect the result of program execution. Part 1. Sequential circuit. A sequential circuit is a logic circuit whose output, the conditions, are influenced by the previous input and output state, or it can be said that a circuit that works based on a time sequence. The main characteristic of sequential logic circuits is the feedback path in the circuit. Flip-flop. Flip-flops are the main circuit in sequential logic. Counters, register, memory, and other sequential sequences are arranged using the flip-flop as the main component. Flip-flop is a series that has a memory function. This means that this series is able to store data in accordance with the input combination given to it. There are several types of flip-flops that will be discussed, namely the RS flip-flop, JK flip-flop, D flip-flop, and T flip-flop. The main characteristic of the flip-flop is that the output Q and key are always opposites, stable if key due to the two stable condition. The flip-flop circuit is also called a bistable circuit. Next, counter. Counter circuit or counter is a sequential logic that can be used to count the number of incoming pulse and expressed as binary number. As the name implies, for BIT, binary counter is a logic circuit consisting of 4 flip-flops capable of carrying out calculation up to the number 16. Next, register. Registers are very small memories with the high access speeds. Registers are used to store data and instructions that are being processed, while data and other instructions that are waiting for their turn to be processed will be stored in the main memory. Memory. Memory is the center of operation in modern computer systems, serving as a repository of information that must be properly organized and preserved. Memory is a large array of words or bytes called address. Part 2. Combinational sequence. A combinational circuit is a circuit whose output depends only on the at that moment input. In principle, combination sequences are a direct application and translator of Boolean algebra, which is usually expressed as a logical function, logical operator used in Boolean algebra, not inversion or negation, logical multiplication, logical addition. Example of a combinational sequence. First one, an encoder. An encoder is a combinational logic circuit that functions to convert or encode a discrete input signal into a binary code output. Next, multiplexer. Multiplexer combinational logic circuit, or abbreviated as MUX, is an electronic device or component that can select the input to be forwarded to the output, the selection of which input is selected will be determined by the signal in the select control selection. And the last is demultiplexer. Demultiplexer combinational logic circuits are components that function is reserved of MUX. In DEMUX, there is only one input but a large number of outputs. The signal in this input section will be channeled to the output, which depends on the control on the select section.
The semantic aspect of linguistic events. Definition of semantics. In linguistics, semantics is the subfield that studies meaning. Semantics can address meaning at the levels of word, phrase, sentences, or larger unit of discourse. One of the crucial questions which unites different approaches to linguistic semantic, is that of the relationship between form and meaning. Aspects of semantic are generic and specific predication, stative predicates and dynamic predicates, durative and punctual, atelic and telic, predicates of location, prospective and retrospective, and some grammatical expression of aspect. Generic and specific predications. Generic has two types. Generic is the statement about things that we cannot change, meanwhile non-generic is statement about things or situation we can change. Then, stative predicates and dynamic predicates. Stative predicate is describe sentence that exist, whether permanent or temporary in nature. Meanwhile, dynamic is about explanation with duration, who was determined and it was running in accordance with the time that has been made. Durative and punctual. Durative is of, relate to, or being the verbal aspect that express action continuing unbroken for a period of time, while punctual is of, relate to, or being the verbal aspect that express momentary action or action considered as having. Then, telic and atelic. Atelic is the sentence are carried out and having a result. Actually, no sentence or activities that no result, but here state that atelic is something existing. Activities have goal, but the goal like often activities. Then predicates of location are ingressive aspect, continuative aspect, and aggressive aspect. Prospective and retrospective. Prospective verbs are oriented toward later happenings, meanwhile retrospective verbs are verbs like apologize and Danny. And the last is some grammatical expression of aspect are the prospective illustrate, then the perfect or retrogressive, and the last is the progressive form indicates that activity predicate that is distributed over a period of time with an implied endpoint, but it need not be distributed continuously over that time.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is SUCI SURIANTI, register number A1 into 19116, and thanks for the opportunity given to me to presentation about the material language acquisition, bilingualism, and language change. As we know that language acquisition is the process by which humans acquire the capacity to perceive and comprehend language. In other words, gain the ability to be aware of language and to understand it, as well as to produce and use words and sentences to communicate. And language acquisition usually refers to language acquisition which studies infants and acquisition of their native language, whether that be spoken language or sign language. Thus, it can also refer to bilingual first language acquisition, which refers to an infant simultaneous acquisition. And language acquisition is one of the quintessential human traits. In addition to speech, reading, and writing in a language, which entirely different script compounds the complexity of true foreign language literacy. And definition of bilingualism is the ability of an individual or the members of the community to use two languages effectively, and more than half of the world's population are bilingual or multilingual. And three is definition of language change. Language change is the phenomenon by which permanent alterations are made in feature and the use of the language over time. And natural language change and language change affect all areas of language use. Types of language change include sound change, lexical change, semantic change, and syntactic change. And the branch of linguistic that is expressly concerned with change in a language over time is historical language, also known as diachronic language. And I think enough for me. The next material will be explained by my friend. Thanks for your attention, and closing with Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is TUTI AGUSTIA, reg number A1M2 19118, class B. Okay, pathologies of linguistic behavior. Part 7 of supporter leaders in scope but includes 5 present and useful paper B, Flagnant, A. Goldman, and Me, Azin. Operand 13 in control of 13 talk response continue consists 109,057. Rejection applies as linguistic problems. A. School and Jackson. The natural of language defines in Epsia. Hegut Guess and Jihan. Grammatical complexity and Epsite speech and V. E. Larbet and C. Bound. A pilot study Epsia among Binglangs. One of the traps in dealing with a topic like language disturbance is it rather undercan bounds, Rustanten and are bound. For instance, advanced very Catholic criteria treating when this is one category thus aspects of certification which have been discussed as was case for language as will a psycholinguistic disorder such as Epsia. Thus I will now functional oriented study by Lawrence and Cow. The flagon, gold, diamond, and azin paper. The only one is this section that does not deal with Epsia discuss the relation of sorting to the Partian axiom. It reports on an experiment in which sorting was experimentally to advanced limit. Moreover, the past decade has seen some variation thinking about the typologies of Epsia and about the linguistic importance of Epsia for a general theory of language. There have been some advances in the descriptive characterization of Epsia as Wilfilbaud and Jonas. Jackson has been responsible for much of the rethinking about Epsia on the part of linguistics. The paper included in the reader is only one of several from this author's hand. The paper he has written during the past decade are derived from ideas Friedman now in his Kinderspeech emphasized on language. A second observation reported by Jacobons is that there are two fundamental types of upside disturbance, representing respective impairment of the two basic linguistic processes implied in speech selection and combination. Implementation of the selection process is referenced in so-called similar disorder, while in plant, the combinatory process products consider disorders. Jacobson considers this is basic dichotomy between similar and contiguous disorders to evaluate the all distance between motor productive and sensory receptor types. Is it noteworthy that this is the one topical category represented in the supporta reader which was not given consideration at similar and on Pscholinguistic? The most likely reason was the conference was held at time before with a familiar which Jackson and Luria Rings had a linguist attention of the importance which speech pathologists hold our general theory of language before the acquisitive developed in sprite the interceptia which Bloomfield revealed the second chapter of his Language. The study of speech pathology was not doubt also avoided by linguistics because it rather regarded as an applied discipline. Okay, thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
My name is Siti INSAN. I will explain the material about linguistic relativity and the relation of linguistic process to perception and cognition. Okay, first thing about linguistic relativity. Linguistic relativity is the relationship among language, culture, and thought that has been proven by research through different types of experiment. Thus, it is a conclude that idea that all thought is constrained by language has been disproved, and the opposite idea that language does not influence thought at all is also widely considered to be false. Such is the idea held by both Shakespeare and Furr in their study of American Indian that language that they think in different ways because their language offers a way of expressing or meaning the outside world around them in different ways. Okay, second about the relation of linguistic process to perception and cognition. Language is a means of communication that we have used so far. Language, according to cognitive psychologists, is a communication system in which thoughts are transmitted by means of sound, as in conversation, or symbols, as in written words or physical clues. The study of language is a study that cognitive psychologists consider important. Language development reflects a unique abstraction on which human cognition is based. Language is the primary means of human communication, the most common way of exchanging information. The second about language and perception of cognition. It have a reciprocal relationship. Variables in the form of cognitive domain can be considered as precursors to the development of language structures in the early stage of child development. Language processing is an important component in information processing, thinking, and problem solving. However, production or language production that may or may not depend on their cognitive domains is evidence. For example, some individuals with language disorders who have interior aphasic in their brain as optimal performance. For example, a significant relationship was found between the ability to classify or classificatory ability and understanding the meaning of words or word meaning in individuals who experience language disorders or individuals who suffer from schizophrenia.